If you're like me, have you ever wondered, how the hell did we get from the free-fall bombs of the Second World War to the high-tech, high accuracy of picking which window you would like to hit? Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Jaxom Talks Channel, where we dive into the fascinating, and sometimes frankly, ridiculous world of military history. So today, we're tackling a question that, let's be honest, probably keeps at least 3 of you up at night. What was the first US cruise missile system that was capable of true self-guidance? We're not referring to just, firing in a general direction and hoping for the best. We are talking about actually adjusting course and altitude en route to the target without input from a person having to adjust mid-flight. Now, before we get into the nitty-gritty of radar maps and gyroscopes, let's set the scene. Imagine, if you will, the early days of missile technology. We're talking about a time when engineers were basically strapping rockets to glorified tin cans and saying, right, point it that way, hit the button and pray. It was less precision strike, more like an extremely expensive fireworks display with potentially devastating consequences. Imagine trying to hit a bullseye with a super soaker from across the street. You're probably just going to get everyone wet, and maybe annoy a cat or two. But when it comes to hitting the exact target, well, not so much. The evolution of the cruise missile, from those early, rather blunt instruments to the incredibly sophisticated, self-navigating marvels we have today. It's a story of human ingenuity, Cold War paranoia, and a whole lot of really smart people trying to figure out how to make a flying bomb go exactly where they needed it to. Believe me, this was a journey filled with some truly bizarre detours and technological leaps that even today will make you go, wait, they did what? So, buckle up, grab your beverage of choice, because we're about to unravel a tale of ambition, innovation, and explore the birth of truly intelligent missiles. Let's start with the pray and spray. Think about it, hitting a moving target, or even a stationary one from hundreds of miles away, without a human hand on the joystick, sounds like business as usual, right? Well, it wasn't always that way. For a long time, our best bet was what I like to call the pray and spray method. Now, while that might be fun with a garden hose, with a flying bomb or an unguided missile, not so much. So, where do we even begin this journey from pray and spray to pinpoint precision? Well, let's start with the granddaddy of them all, the original angry sky potato, the V-1 flying bomb. Now, if you ask most people about early cruise missiles, the V-1 is probably the first thing that springs to mind, and for good reason. It was terrifyingly effective in its own, rather crude way. You can even see some of the design choices in today's versions of cruise missiles. Launched by Nazi Germany during World War II, it was, at its heart, a really fast tin can with wings and a pulse jet engine bolted on its back. It sounded like a motorcycle from hell, earning it the lovely nickname Doodlebug. Charming, right? But here's the kicker. Was it self-guided? Well, when you consider that if a toddler pushing a toy car across the floor is kind of self-guided, then, however, the V-1 had a gyroscope to keep it level and flying in a general direction, and a magnetic compass to keep it broadly on course. And get this, for distance, it had a small propeller on the nose that literally counted the number of rotations. Once it hit a preset number, it cut the engine and basically dived for the ground. It was the ultimate fire and forget weapon. But the forget part was more about forgetting where it actually lands than forgetting that it needs guidance. I mean, imagine trying to navigate across a city just by counting your footsteps and hoping you don't veer too much to the left or right. You'd end up in the next county, probably buying a really weird souvenir. The V-1 had no concept of wind, no idea if it was off course, no way to correct itself. It was the epitome of fire in a general direction. It was a technological marvel for its time, absolutely, but it was not exactly what you would call smart. It was more like stubbornly determined to fly straight until it falls over. The post-war era and missiles still learning to drive. After the war, both the United States and the Soviet Union scrambled to get their hands on German rocket and missile technology, including the V-1. The Americans were particularly interested. They saw the potential. What if you could take the basic idea of the V-1 and make it better, make it more reliable, give it a longer range, and most importantly, make it accurate? Fast forward a bit, the war ends, the Cold War begins, and suddenly, everyone wants bigger, faster, and more accurate ways to deliver their unpleasantries. Enter the American response to the V-1, or rather, the American evolution, the MGM-1 Matador. Now, the Matador, which became operational in 1952, was a step up for sure. It was faster, had a longer range, and looked a lot more like what we'd consider a modern missile. But here's the problem. It still wasn't truly self-guided. The Matador was still a bit of a needy missile. It required constant radio command guidance. The system was initially designed to use the SHANICL, which stands for Short Range Navigation Vehicle Guidance System. This was essentially an adaptation of the LORAN hyperbolic navigation system using microwave frequencies to make it smaller and more accurate. A total of 4 stations were required per missile. 2 were used to produce a signal defining a line passing over the target, and a second pair defined the range. The missile's transponders rebroadcasted these signals where they were picked up by receivers at the master station. Think of it like this. You're trying to fly a really powerful, really fast radio control plane, but the plane is 600 miles away. You've got a team of dedicated, probably very stressed out human operators on the ground, glued to radar screens, sending joystick commands to steer it. Every tiny adjustment, every course correction input had to be made by a human. It was an incredibly complex dance between man and machine, and frankly, a huge point of vulnerability. What happens if the radio link gets jammed? What if the missile travels out of range and loses contact? Poof! Gone. Lost. Probably ends up in a farmer's field somewhere, much to the farmer's annoyance. This wasn't self-guidance at all. This was more of a remote control guidance, and if you've ever tried to fly a drone on a windy day, you know how tricky that can be. Now imagine you are doing that, but instead of your hobby drone, the stakes are, potentially world-altering. The first flight of the Matador occurred at the White Sands Missile Range on January 20, 1949. The first to production B-61 Matador missiles arrived at Eglin Air Force Base in Florida in September 1953, becoming operational. This allowed for climatic testing, although instrumentation and pre-test checkouts kept the actual cold weather tests from beginning until the November. The last Matadors were removed from active service in 1962, with a total of 1,200 missiles produced. At that time, they were deployed in squadrons at Bitburg Air Base, West Germany, in Tainan, Taiwan, and in various locations in South Korea. So, while the Matador was a significant leap in range and speed, it still had that umbilical cord, that constant need for human intervention. It still didn't have that fundamental autonomy, that ability to think for itself. That particular evolution was the problem that still needed to be solved. Time for a game changer. Enter the Mace and Atron. This brings us, finally, to our answer. The true pioneer in US self-guided cruise missile technology. Drumroll please. The MGM-13 Mace, specifically the Alpha variant, the TM-76A, which became operational in 1959. Now, why was the Mace different, and what made this missile the one that broke the mold? The answer lies in a genuinely revolutionary guidance system called Atron, that stands for Automatic Terrain Recognition and Navigation. Catchy, right? Rolls right off the tongue. Developed by the brilliant minds at Goodyear Aircraft Corporation, Atron was, in simple terms, the first time a missile could actually see where it was going and adjust its own course. Here's how this technological marvel worked, and honestly, for 1959, this is mind-blowing. The Mace carried a physical film strip of pre-recorded radar maps inside its nose. Think of it like a really, really tiny, super-secret movie projector of the ground. As the missile flew along, it had its own onboard radar system that scanned the terrain directly below it. It was literally taking snapshots of the landscape. Then the magic happened. The Mace would compare what its radar saw in real time to the preloaded radar images on that film strip. It was like a high-risk game of spot the difference, but with catastrophic consequences if it got it wrong. If the live radar image didn't match the map image, the missile knew it was off course. It didn't need a human telling it what to do. It didn't need a magnetic compass that could be fooled by a strong magnet. It had a visual reference. Atron had the advantage that it was not subject to a maximum range or jamming issues, and in theory, could attack any target within range of the missile. That said, it had the significant disadvantage that it could only attack pre-selected targets, unlike the radio system which would be directed at any target at any time. Any particular missile could be directed at a selected target by changing the film, but targets of opportunity could not be attacked unless they happened to lie along an existing path. Moreover, as the system compared the radar image to one made prior to flight, it was difficult to make maps much beyond the peacetime borders. This drawback was later addressed by developing a method that used small models, based on topographical maps, to produce the films for any given flight, allowing the missile to follow paths that could not be pre-flown. The really crucial bit here is that once it detected a mismatch, it would automatically adjust its own flight controls, its rudders, its elevators, in order to get back on the correct path. This meant it could fly at incredibly low altitudes, dodging enemy radar, navigating through valleys and around mountains. All this without a single human input after launch. It was truly autonomous and was truly self-guided. This wasn't just flying in a general direction anymore. This was flying in a very specific direction, with the ability to correct itself if it got lost. It was the difference between sending a letter with just a street name and sending a letter with a detailed map, landmarks highlighted and instructions to correct course. So why did the Mace matter, and how did it build a legacy of intelligence? The Mace wasn't just a fancy new weapon. It was a paradigm shift. It laid the groundwork for almost every advanced cruise missile system that followed. You know, those incredibly accurate, almost legendary Tomahawk cruise missiles that can fly for hundreds of miles, weave through city streets, and hit a specific window? Well, the lineage, the direct technological ancestor of their terrain contour matching systems, can be traced directly back to the Atron system in the Mace. Tercom, in essence, is a digital, highly advanced version of Atron. Instead of film strips, you have digital maps. Instead of optical comparisons, you have sophisticated computer algorithms. But the core principle of using terrain features to navigate and correct the course that was born with the Mace still remains. Now, some of you might be thinking, but what about the SM-62 Snark? That was around the same time. And you'd be right to ask. The Snark was another incredibly ambitious project, operational around the late 1950s. It was an intercontinental cruise missile, designed to fly thousands of miles, and it used stellar inertial guidance. Basically, it looked at the stars to figure out where it was. Super cool, very futuristic. But here's the distinction, and it's an important one for our question today. While stellar inertial guidance provided incredibly accurate long-range navigation, it wasn't terrain recognition in the same way Atron was. It wasn't actively comparing what it saw on the ground to a map for local, tactical course corrections. It was looking up, not down. Both were groundbreaking in their own right, but for the specific capability of self-guidance via terrain recognition, the Mace and Atron take the crown. The Mace was the one that truly took the cruise missile from its dependence on external human control or simple, uncorrectable inertial systems. It gave the missile a set of eyes and a brain to understand its environment and adapt. And that, my friends, was a truly monumental leap. It transformed these flying bombs from glorified target practice into genuine, autonomous weapons systems. Rapid development in guidance systems quickly rendered Atron obsolete. In 1959, a modified version replacing Atron with the AC Spark Plug Achiever INS was developed as TM-76B. A major advantage was that the Atron radar system scanned the horizon in front of the missile and thus had to fly at low altitudes in order to produce enough vertical relief. By moving to a pure INS, there was no longer any limitation on altitude, and by flying higher the range increased to about 1,300 miles. This was achieved with no other changes. The downside to the INS approach is that it requires an accurate survey of the launch point, so the system could no longer be mobile. This led to the B models being launched from hardened coffin launchers. The first TM-76B launch was on July 11, 1960. But the innovation didn't stop there. What if you could launch a Mace from somewhere even more surprising? Enter the submarine. The US Navy experimented with a submarine-launched version of a similar missile, the Regulus. Two submarines, the USS Tunney and USS Barbero, were converted to carry and launch these missiles from a large watertight hangar on their decks. The sub would surface, the hangar would slowly open with the missile being rolled out onto a launch rail and fired. It was a bold concept, proving that you could turn any patch of ocean into a potential launch site. While the Regulus program was eventually superseded by the far more advanced Polaris ballistic missile, it laid the crucial groundwork. It demonstrated the strategic advantage of sea-based launch platforms. This is a concept that remains central to naval power projection today. This idea of deploying cruise missiles from submarines, ships, and aircraft expanded their operational flexibility enormously. From the dumb doodlebugs to smart strike systems. So there you have it, folks, from the pray and spray of the V-1 doodlebug, which basically just flew until it ran out of gas, to the human-controlled Matador, which needed constant handholding, we finally get to the MGM-13 Mace with its incredible Atron system. This wasn't just a bigger, faster missile. This was a smarter missile. This was the first cruise missile that could actually see the world around it, compare it to a map, and adjust its own course without any external intervention. It was truly self-guided. It paved the way for the precision strike capabilities we often take for granted today. So, the next time you hear about a cruise missile hitting its target with uncanny accuracy, remember the Mace. The technologies pioneered in the Mace program, especially the Atron terrain following guidance system, were the direct ancestors of the systems currently used in modern cruise missiles like the Tomahawk. From the crude, buzzing V-1 terror weapon to the smart terrain-hugging Mace, the evolution of the cruise missile in just 2 decades was nothing short of revolutionary. So that's it for today's video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, leave a comment below, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on future posts. As always, thanks for the support and for watching, and I will see you next time.